All right, it's Cinco de Mayo, and I frankly don't care. Just another culture that Americans can pretend to understand and not actually understand at all. So, yay. Welcome to the Sunshine State Happy Hour, powered by FloridaBeerBlog.com and the Florida Beer Podcast. I am Dave, your host and author. Steve is coming home from work, so maybe he'll jump on. And our guest today is knowledgeable about that since his other half is coming home from work and may jump on a little bit later. Mike from the Wort podcast, which is also on the Hopped Up Network. Mike, it looks like it is a beautiful, beautiful day on the island.
It is. It's about 60 degrees. Sun's out right now. Wasn't out all day, but it's nice. Just catching some rays while I can,
I've got the studio inside, but I'm taking a look outside, and my wife and kid are on the hammock, and it's absolutely cloudless, and I don't understand why I'm not doing it out there right now.
Wi-Fi. It's always the answer is Wi-Fi.
Yeah, I think you're actually correct on that. So, we were chatting a little bit about this before I pressed the live button. What are you drinking? Because it's got an interesting story behind it.
Yeah, man. This is our buddies from. Well, I'm trying to move it in the camera. It's opposite because I'm facing. Buddies from Long Beach Brewing Company. There you go.
There we go. Beautiful.
And they got a really crazy story. I mean, they've been around for a while now, doing some contract brewing, and then they came upon their space. I'm going to say a little under a year ago. Started doing the build out and the permits and everything. Before the pandemic hit, they didn't have really a date to open, but they were hoping in the next few months. And at this point, obviously, that's not happening. So, they had some core beers, which are delicious. They're Ghost Wave. They're 3550A, which is their old apartment number where they used to homebrew in Long Beach. That's a Pilsner. And then they had couple other iterations of other beers that they are really good at brewing. One's a nice Belgium, and then they had I already said the Pilsner, and then they had a stout out at one point. So this is their first. I wish I poured it into a glass because you can see it's not your typical New England IPA. It's not hazy. It's actually very malt forward.
Nice.
A lot of juice balance, but that bitterness still comes through towards the end. So they did a really great job. They're known for a lot of their malt forward beers, and Ghost Wave was like this, but this is a big step up for them. Plus, it's a double, so it's about 8%. And they used El Dorado and Idaho 7, and they did a really great job on this one, and it's starting to catch on. And then they also upgraded their can art, as you were saying. The can
it's
art
absolutely
here is
stunning.
pretty hype. So,
it's funny. I remember reading, many years ago that obviously for wines, they attract a lot of their drinkers through pretty labels and whatnot. And as much as I'd like to say that beer drinkers aren't quite so gullible, that's a total lie. That's a total lie.
I am a sucker for an awesome looking label. When it looks hand drawn and when it's caricatured and crazy artwork and colorful. Yeah, I love that stuff.
It's interesting that you mentioned that because I've spoken with a lot of people, especially down here, and looked at a lot of redesigns that a number of breweries are going through. And I've noticed a trend for the opposite, that it's really starting to go minimalist. It's really starting to be very clean, tiny bit of graphics. Maybe the big difference being the color around the rims, something like that being very different. And then of course, obviously you've got, my co-part Steve had something with basically a unicorn severed head. And it was interesting to say the least what he had.
Well, I know there's a brewery out by us, Montauk. Everyone kind of knows Montauk Point, and they've been around for a while. We had them on the show. It was like our third or fourth show. Vaughn and crew have this lineup of cans. They've never deviated from the plot. It's been simple. It just says Montauk Brewery with a little wave underneath it, and then their beer is separated by color. And what everyone describes their beer to taste like is the color that's on the can. So if it's a yellow flag on the white can, because it's mostly white, but then there's a little color, it tastes like yellow. And then you could probably guess it's somewhere around like a Pilsner or an ale, which it is. Their Wave Chaser is purple, and it tastes purple. It's the way they market it, the way they put it together, their watermelon obviously looks like green and reddish, pinkish kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
They just did a great job. There it is. And then
Yeah.
Arrowhead obviously looks like an Arrowhead of red. So they do a great job at, like you said, simplifying. So it almost looks like the way, hard seltzers are doing their stuff now. They're the OG seltzer looking company. And their beer is fantastic. I love the Montauk Ale. I love the Wave Chaser. I call it my palate cleanser. It's a fantastic beer. I could drink that all day, every day.
That's funny.
And I have.
Yeah, I kind of co-opted for something a little bit clean. This is 1010 Brewing out of Orlando, which is funny because I actually went to high school with the brewer, but didn't realize that until a couple of years ago. Basically, this is their hybrid Kolsch, which I love. I mean, in terms of something that I would go for after a long day, I'd go for something this clean and simple and kind of sweet, which is beautiful to have.
Yeah, I like German styles in general. Big fan of a Marzen, dark ale, dark IPA, black IPAs, a brown. I like stouts, but mind you, I like something just a step below a stout. And that's really, my German roots. I can drink, Dunkels all day. Good Kolsch is always good to have. So, that's a style I definitely can conform. If I'm not drinking IPAs, that's what I'm drinking.
Nice. So how are things going sort of away from the center of the city? I know that we were chatting about a couple of breweries that you had been speaking to that are having some issues, obviously opening up. How are things going on your end or around you?
What we gather is, our suburban life here is just minimal social interaction. Other than that, my wife and I both still work. She works from home. I'm a teacher, so I've been doing education from home.
Nice.
So, in regards to that, the kids are around all the time. So that's a big change. We've never been around our kids this long in any, length. Yeah. So that's challenging. And then the breweries themselves are deemed essential, thank God, because I need them to deal with all that. There's been a couple of breweries that have had some bumps along the way. Like, for instance, our buddies over at Hopwinds. Hopwinds was going to open on, I believe it was March 21st. So it was the Saturday after St. Patrick's Day. And that literally was when New York State went into lockdown, was March 16th, 17th, somewhere in there. And so obviously they didn't have a grand opening, but here they are with all this beer ready to go. So they had to quickly convert over to a retail store and do beer out of the door. One of the great things that New York did, thank God, was approve delivery services for alcohol. So now you can get stuff shipped to your door. So that really saved a lot of the breweries and their revenue streams. But, I think everyone around the smaller guys are all hanging on for dear life. And the bigger guys are just finding ways to just tread water until it's over, until they can open up their tasting rooms again. It's definitely a challenge, but I think people are adapting very quickly. They had to. They had no choice. Survival mode in general. And then, I think the future is bright, but it's all a matter of this going away. It's really contingent on this not going back to the way it was back in March, because in the end of March, it was everyone's ready to set fire to their establishment because there's no reason to hold on to it, collect the insurance money and bounce. But then they realized there could be some light here. So, there could be positive things happening, and definitely going to be a new way of thinking about business and new way of doing business. And, every brewery had to go to a website. Every brewery had to go to an ordering service. Every brewery had to go to online ordering, delivery service. It just all was very quick, which was awesome for them. They adapted very fast. But I can't imagine it being any better in regards to making money and in regards to longevity if this continues. So I just, I really hope for their sake, because we have some really great breweries around here on Long Island. Like within a 30-mile radius, I got, 50 breweries that I can visit if you include, Brooklyn and Queens. So it's just an enormous amount of great beer here. Thank God.
Well, I was actually going to ask about that in terms of a cultural standpoint, because you've got Long Island, but you've got Brooklyn, you've got Queens, you've got the rest of Suffolk County, and you've obviously got the other boroughs. Is each borough sort of considered to be its own little beer enclave, or is it just sort of lumped into one massive whole?
I'll say this: Manhattan doesn't have a craft beer scene. Up until like a few months ago, there was only 3 breweries on the island of Manhattan,
Really?
and one of them's Heartland, which is a
Hmm.
quote unquote chain.
Gotcha.
Another one is Death Avenue, which was really never established as a full grown brewery. They didn't distribute it. They weren't
Hmm.
doing anything other than restaurant. It was more like a pub, a brew
Okay.
pub.
Gotcha.
And then the other one was ABC. Um, and ABC is down on the lower east side, I believe. And they have an interesting story. They're relatively new.
Hmm.
Um, so I haven't heard much, chatter about them recently. I've seen a couple of beers, distributed out. So, you know, I guess they're doing great. In regards to the other boroughs, Bronx has its own thing because it's just the Bronx. Staten Island has its own thing because there's 3 breweries there now. So
Hmm.
its flagship. I forget the other two. I can't think of the name exactly. Flagship. Damn it, I had it. I can tell you the beer name, but that's not going to help. So then, people think Brooklyn and Queens is Manhattan, right? And it's not. It's
It's
attached to Long Island. So it's kind of weird how the lines blur a little bit as you go in towards the city. Suffolk bleeds into Nassau, and Nassau bleeds into Queens, and Queens and Brooklyn, a lot of times the lines are very blurred. Um, so, Brooklyn does have a really great beer scene. So does Queens in and of their own right.
mhm.
But it doesn't mean that we don't get the beer out here. Like we on Long Island definitely do very well with getting good Queens and Brooklyn beer out here. So it almost feels like that Nassau is like this buffer area for where I am in Western Suffolk. And in Eastern Suffolk's its own thing. Like we have
Gotcha.
several breweries out on the East End, we'll say, not so much the Forks, but Riverhead, Holbrook area. And that's a good half hour, 40-minute drive for me. I
Mhm.
would travel more towards Nassau County, Queens, and Brooklyn because the number of breweries you can visit in a day, as opposed to going all the way out east. Though most of our friends are out east, so we tend to go out there anyway.
I've been told,
Um,
yeah, especially Brooklyn, that's kind of the hip place to be now, and that's where obviously you see a lot of those places. Um, I would assume that it's a little bit more dense there.
mhm.
So, would a lot of those breweries had to have changed a lot of how they are operating? Do you see a lot of curbside in those
Oh yeah,
areas? Okay.
oh yeah, yeah. Everything had to change. I mean, so you have these other breweries like Alewife, which is a brewery slash restaurant, or you want to
Hmm.
call it a, but they do very massive distribution. You have Evil Twin, and
Yeah.
other half has been like well known to just have lines outside and people waiting for releases, and they still do their releases, believe it or not.
Yeah.
But now I can actually find other half of my local distributor, so they've been distributing because of the tap room. So they've actually unleashed their um, reach, let's say, just to kind of bring in more people and have more sales. And obviously they have a reputation across the world,
Yeah.
so that's an easy one to get. Also, breweries upstate, Equilibrium, another big boy in the game, has started doing full New York State delivery to your door, which
Wow.
is ridiculous. I can place an order; it'll come to my door in 2 to 3 days.
That's amazing.
Unbelievable. So I would say, as a consumer, I am benefiting tremendously from this. But if I was a brewery owner, I'd be scared as crap. I would not have a fun time dealing with this as a small business.
The one question that I'm always interested in, you answered it a little bit, especially with other half, is I've spoken to some breweries and they've mentioned that they have tried to keep as many new beers on tap, maybe even more so than they normally had to do, just to keep people interested. And then there were a number of other breweries that mentioned that they've sort of fallen back on their standards and their cores and really doubled down on that production, since they can go to grocery stores and things, places like that that are opening. The
Right.
places that you frequent and that you really talk to a lot, what have they sort of done? Which one of those two?
Yeah, there's been a couple of people that tried new stuff. Seasons are changing here. It's not always warm. So, the seasonal releases are on track. But yeah, a
Hmm.
lot of them find this is a good time to even get new customers in places where they couldn't have reached before, or didn't even think to reach, and now they are forced to. So you have people re-releasing, like Finback re-released their Green City, which was an awesome beer.
Uh-huh.
And most of their IPAs are delicious anyway. But like a lot of them are going back to like their roots. And I'm going to be honest with you, and I don't know if there's any research based on this, so don't quote me. But I have a feeling a lot of their original beers and their recipes weren't very expensive. Obviously, when you're starting out, you want to make your profit margin bigger. So you get the stuff that's, very available, cheaper ingredients. Not to say that's going to be a bad tasting beer at all. But what you're doing is you're trying to make the most out of what's going on right now, and you can pull the most profit from a couple of beers that you used to have. Plus, again, it reintroduces it back into the system and kind of puts your name back on the map. So I think it's like a twofold, answer to that.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about the Wort, which is, for those of you that haven't heard it, very loose and free form in some ways. Is that a polite way of saying it?
Yeah, we're a bunch of crazy motherfuckers. We'll say it like that. I don't know if there's cursing on your show, but there's a lot of cursing on my show at times.
I think for as long as I've been doing this virtual happy hour, I think you have the first F-bomb, so congratulations.
Yes. My parents wouldn't be proud. Neither would my wife. But yes, I think to say that loosely, I grew up with radio. I'm a radio guy. I went to school for audio, video, and spent some time on the radio.
Nice.
Where with the FCC rules at college radio and regular radio, you feel it. You feel like you want to break free. You want to just let out a curse every so often. And for me, I grew up listening to Stern. I grew up listening to Opie and Anthony. I grew up listening to Ron and Fez. I grew up listening to guys that, were able to stay within the FCC guidelines, but really push the envelope. And I always liked that. And then when Sirius XM came out, and I saw, the freedom people had to speak how they wanted to speak and talk how they normally talk. It's not about the punctuation of the curse. It's about knowing that I'm a real person. And, I was just at the post office and the cleaning guy is dropping F-bombs. And I'm like, as a parent, I'm like, shut up. But as a guy, I'm like, that's just a regular guy, man, living his life, and that's how I feel when people make the connections to people on the radio, when you hear people's names and when you see people's personalities. Pete and I are 100% the people you're meeting. This is how we speak to each other. This is how we speak in our quote unquote unprofessional life. And that's our thought process, that the show would be us interviewing brewers and getting down to meeting the brewers. The thing about going to a brewery is you don't always get that chance. You don't always get to sit and talk with a guy and find out stuff about not only the beer, but his personal life and how it came to be. And you'll find that a lot of the guys are more real with you when you act like you're more real. So that's why we said we're just going to, take the chains off. We're not getting signed to any major radio station or have to go by FCC rules. We'll do a show for the people, and we'll bring them the stories that they couldn't get themselves at the breweries. So that's our thought process. And it does get out of control every so often, especially when we have some really great characters in there, man. When we have some of our brewery guests that are just, really great interviewers, we tell them there's no holds barred, man. Say whatever you want. At this point, Pete and I aren't looking to offend anybody. We don't have any grudges or any, bigotries or anything like that. We just want to have fun and hang out, and we want to be part of that hangout. And that's really what our show is all about.
That's perfect. And it's funny that you mention, being real and honest, and, letting a few words go here and there. Because I was going to ask, do you think that podcasting, obviously, you've got a podcast, I've got a podcast, I got to say hello to the Hopped Up Network. Do you think that is going to hurt or help radio in any way, shape, or form? And it's funny because one of the morning stations down here, the host is a big fan of craft beer, and so he and I chat on a somewhat regular basis. But it's funny because they've got the regular morning show, and then right after that, they record a podcast every day where they're allowed to curse, they're allowed to relax the FCC rules. He can have a beer while he's manning the controls, which obviously, FCC rules he can't during the normal operation. What do you think podcasting is doing to that industry?
So I'm a big fan of sports radio. So one of the things up here in New York, we got Mike Francesa, we got Mike and Mad Dog I grew up with, which is another one I meant to mention. And now we have Boomer and Carton for a while. Now it's Boomer and Geo. So these guys also, kind of sit in that realm of FCC rule people, and especially now, Boomer and Carton, Boomer and Geo, in the morning, they push the boundaries, man. There's some stuff that they're saying on there. Then I go, wow, that wouldn't have flew 5 years ago when things got a little tight in the radio industry. I think there's room for everybody, because I still listen to the regular radio. Do I listen to music? No. I think music stations are doomed and they're doomed for the people that really know technology. For the parents right now, when they finally, are not here anymore, in another generation or so, I don't listen to music on the radio anymore. I listen to talk radio because that art I don't think is ever going to go away, whether they're held by regulations or not. To hear somebody talk about whether it be sports or politics or anything like that, it's a really great venue. And no matter what the level of restrictions are, I think that will still survive. But then I'll go over and I'll listen to Joe Rogan. I was listening to Joe Rogan interview a scientist. And I don't think he cursed the entire episode, but yet you'll get another comic on and, everything goes. So it's not so much about the cursing. It's about the content. And as long as regular radio keeps up with the level of content that podcasts can do, I think they'll be fine. Would I love to go over to Sirius XM and do a show like that? That would be great. It's just a broader reach, but it would never fly because we all have our own, niche here in the podcast world. Yeah. We're all radio people at this point. And I don't really even differentiate podcasts to radio at this point. I say whatever's live, like we are now, is radio. And whatever is archived and then put up and posted for people to download, that's the podcast version. Gotcha. So we always say, we call ourselves the Wort a podcast, but we're really a craft beer radio show. We're doing real radio like regular radio people do every day. We're just not held to FCC, and we also archive and throw it out there for people to listen to later.
Interesting. With the downturn, it's funny, something that I have noticed personally myself is I have not been able to listen to as many shows as I used to when I was commuting and so on. Have you noticed that with your numbers and your, I don't want to say viewership, but listenership?
Yeah, I mean, we do get a lot of people that throw it on the car, obviously on their commute and the train and stuff like that. So yeah, but also those people now are home and they're looking for live content. We actually got, and it was amazing, the outpour of people in the last month or so, people saying, we listened to the show, great show. It was a great escape for my, nonsensical life for the last, half hour, 40 minutes, however long they listened to. They're out there listening to it, mowing the lawn or just going into their rooms away from their families for a little bit and listening, or sitting down to their work at their desk, and they could never listen to music or anything while doing work from home, and now they can, So I don't see a huge drop off. I actually was just running statistics today. Now that you say that, okay. And to be honest with you, since Jan 1, we're on a pretty steady streak here, and between our RSS feed views and our live views through govsradio.com and our archived videos on YouTube on our channel, we're reaching a lot of people. We're getting a lot of impressions and a lot of views, which is awesome. I'm really happy and stoked. And to be honest with you, we didn't even post the last two shows on two of our sites because I'm just lazy. As busy as I usually am, I feel like I'm busier now home with the kids and everything. This is actually rare that the kids haven't ran out here and yelled at me. My wife isn't yelling at me right now.
I've been watching shadows in your glass door. So, there's just one went by. Oh, boy.
No, she's closing the blinds. Like, don't look at Dad. He's an a-hole.
Nice.
See? Look. Exactly.
All right. There we go. So I've been listening to the show. It's really good. But somebody had mentioned a couple of episodes ago something that I had never really thought of, but really piqued my interest in that. Obviously, a lot of the breweries down here in South Florida and a lot of breweries pretty much everywhere around the country, they hadn't necessarily packaged their beer before, but now they are starting to can. specifically cans and not necessarily bottles. And you made the great point that bottles are more expensive. They do take more time. And the inference was made that this situation could start to help hasten the eventual complete and total death of the bottle in craft beer. Do you think that's going to be the case? Do you think that it's going to shift even more to cans than it already had been?
Oh yeah, I mean the growler right now, I look at it and go, ugh, I don't want a growler anymore. Like 2 or 3 years ago, I was like, yeah, I'll go down and get a growler, and then I'll drink that tonight. Nope. Now I'm gonna go get 4 or 5 crowlers, and I have at least a week before they start turning.
That's what this was from.
There you go. Yeah, so I'm saying like crowlers and the machine and the time and the effort. I mean, the big thing to the breweries is, your 32-ounce crowler, that can cost money. So they got to look at the overhead on that. I noticed they tick up on all of our local breweries, charging maybe an extra $1 or $2.
Yeah.
But that's because the supply chain down here or up here rather, not down here, up here is, is kind of really rough. And so some of the breweries are actually going in on crowler can orders. So, they're all placed their orders for 1,000 crowlers. And then when one gets it, they'll give, everyone 200. And then when the next one gets it, they'll spread it out. So at least it keeps the flow of crowlers in the thing. And that's pretty much where everyone's going. And so unless you have a canning line, not a bottling line, maybe at least if you, like Dubco just got a canning line because they saw the future of this being canned 4-packs all day, every day. And they've been doing it for a while, but they've been outsourcing it. It's time to bite the bullet and get it yourself. And if you have the space, you're almost better off getting that canning line because that's the way it's going to go. I mean, bottles are almost nostalgia now to me. When I get a bottle, I'm like, oh, look at this funny looking thing. Remember bottles? They're crazy.
And I'll tell you the one thing that I think is just going to be completely gone in a couple of years are the 22-ounce bomber.
Oh, yeah.
Really funny. And I've noticed a lot of people are going for 12-ounce 4-packs. I've actually seen some places with, the heavy Russian Imperial Stouts to do a 3-pack of 8-ounce stubbies, which is brilliant.
That's a cool idea.
Yeah, I mean,
was that like 8.5, 8.5 ounce? Yeah.
Oh, it was
somewhere in there.
Yeah, something like that. And I just thought it was great because the one problem with bombers and crowlers is that if you open it, that's the night that you finish it. And sometimes there are just some beers that are so big and so heavy that you unfortunately can't.
Yeah, can you imagine getting a 64-ounce growler of like a 10% Russian Imperial Stout? I mean, that would be crazy.
Yeah,
the last bottle Sorry,
no, go ahead. No, you were going to say something.
The last bottle I drank was just the other day. It's been a long time since I've had a bottle since then. But we actually just introduced a new co-host to our show. So it's not just the Wort with Mike and Pete much anymore. It's the Wort with Mike, Pete, and Steve. And Steve has been a brewer on Long Island for a very long time, had a brewery called Barrage. And Barrage was in Farmingdale and was one of our favorites. And he is one of our favorite people in the industry. Great guy, great personality, very knowledgeable. And, this was before the pandemic that he decided to close. Okay. And it was personal reasons. He already has a full-time job. He didn't have a huge tasting room. So he can actually, at one point, if we ever have him on, he'll tell you the whole story behind it. Or if you listen to past shows when he was on right after the closing. But he actually had he gave Pete and I his first release. So when he did his release, he established in 2012, he did a Russian Imperial Stout. It was a 10% stout called Famous Last Words. It was a stout that he bottled. So that's how old the process was to distribute it. But he held on to a bunch of bottles, and he gave Pete and I one of the last 2 that he had. Nice. And man, that beer held up. It was delicious. It was strongish. It was probably stronger than 10 at that point. But it'd probably be one of the last beers I drink out of a bottle because you just don't see that anymore. And I don't seek it out in the store. Anything that I want is probably going to be in a 4-pack 16-ounce. That's pretty much the way the industry is now. Yeah,
it actually brings to a good point. There are very few beers that require a bottle, but there are some. There's a place a little bit north of us that specializes in Belgian-style ales, and that's all they make. So with that one, not only do they have to do bottles, but they have to do very special bottles. It's not the average just pull a wine bottle off the shelf and kind of go from there.
Yeah, if you're familiar with like Transmitter in New York City at the Brook Navy Yard, they just moved in there a couple months ago, and a lot of their releases are not bombers, but more like the larger size bottles. I don't even know what they call them. They look like wine bottles, pretty much.
Yeah.
I can't remember what the size of it was. It's not quite a 32, but it's up there. Like Hudson
Yeah.
Valley does some of its releases in those types of bottles when it does like the wild yeast or wild ale versions of some of their iterations of their, farmhouse ales. They release it like that. Almost looks like a champagne bottle. That's what I would,
exactly
attribute it to. But, that's kind of what lends itself to that style, obviously.
Excellent. Well, I do appreciate your time. It looks like you have an absolutely gorgeous day out there to enjoy. So I do want to leave you with the question that I have been asking everybody, and I'm curious as to what you say about this. Basically, we've talked about a number of changes that some breweries have had to make to sort of stay afloat in this bizarre situation that we have. Once everything is back to normal, once our lives are completely done with and we've got a vaccine and whatever, what is something that you have seen some breweries do that you think should be a normal part of beer culture life? Something that you want everybody to be able to continue to do even once the quarantine is ancient history?
I do like the delivery service, though. Once we're allowed to get out, then it probably won't be as necessary. Though places like in Brooklyn, Queens, Manhattan, Bronx, upstate New York, I would love to be still able to get their beer if I didn't want to make the trip, even if it is in a small, maybe a case, quantity, not limit, but what they say minimum. So I've been to Equilibrium twice now, but I would still love to have their beer all the time. So when they have a new release, I would love to have it shipped to us. And that's something that was only possible since this pandemic started. So that's one thing I'd probably like. And then, just general cleanliness. I have always been not a germaphobe, but just I do wash my hands a couple times a day. I always have. I've started using Purell now more than ever, which is not me, but it works. I just like not to say breweries are dirty at all. Obviously their brewing process requires a hell of a lot of sterilization. But just in general, the public in the tasting rooms, now everyone's more, conscious of what it takes to just be, more sterile, more clean. And actually just makes a better environment for everybody and enhances the experience, I think.
Excellent. I do appreciate your time. The Wort, a podcast, is available wherever fine podcasts can be found, or maybe not fine, but sub-fine podcasts.
And obviously on the Hopped Up Network, man, big shout out to them. They've been a big backer and supporter for all the podcasts around the country. And we have been invited now twice down to the Atlantic City Beer Festival, which right now is slated to be August 7th, 8th. Who knows what's going to happen, but the Hopped Up Network actually hosts it, and then specifically called us in and asked us to be part of that. And awesome experience last year, and we're hoping for another awesome experience this year.
Excellent. That is exciting. So, as we're in the middle of Hopped Up Network Week on the Sunshine State Happy Hour, tomorrow is going to be the South Jersey beer scene, and they are actually bringing along the president of Brewery Strong, which I know is somebody that you spoke to on your last episode. So I'm excited to learn a little bit more about their organization and kind of how that is. If you want to find out more about us, we're at floridabeerblog.com. Florida Beer Podcast is available pretty much every place that the Wort Podcast is available. So hopefully you'll subscribe to both of us at the same time, which would be great. Mike, thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it, and I will let you get back to enjoying some more craft beers with your wife.
Thanks, Dave. I appreciate it. Later.